Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to yet another episode of AR Chat. Today, of course, I have my lovely co host, but I also have a very special guest, my colleague, Greg Wind, who is one of the VPs of the agency at ARInsights. Greg, thanks for
Hello,
joining us
everyone.
today.
I'm
Welcome
glad
to
to
our
be here.
100 subscriber watch party, Greg.
100.
Sorry
Uh,
to those 5 people who snuck in at the end.
Yeah, you had a little boop.
Yeah.
It's great to
And
be
the
here.
trajectory is going in the right direction.
So, Greg, tell us a
Keep
little
going.
bit about yourself.
So, I am Greg Wind. I've been with ARInsights a day short of 2 years. We were acquired 2 years ago. Before that, my wife and I ran a agency that was dedicated to analyst relations. We'd been doing that for about 13 years, and before that, I worked in PR agencies mostly. So my run with analyst relations really started maybe about 15, 20 years ago, but working in a PR firm, obviously you approach analyst relations different. And luckily I had my wife, Patty, who had been doing analyst relations for a long time. So I got a different perspective. And when we started our own agency, we quickly decided we would focus on analyst relations. There really wasn't anybody doing that at the time. And companies were starting to become aware that you could outsource analyst relations support that hadn't really been done before that. There were some freelancers out there, and it was interesting to talk to them and get their experience, but it wasn't a common thing. And obviously now it's far more common. So I feel like we got a significant stroke of luck in people getting comfortable with that idea. But
So, Greg,
otherwise, we have
the
3 kids
fascinating,
and a dog.
the
What kind of
fascinating,
dog?
We have a lab.
Okay.
so
Okay.
fascinating thing for me, Greg. I mean, you talk about the genesis of the agency model. I still think it's not that well understood and I don't think it's appreciated how pervasive it is across the industry for people to either fully outsource it or at least staff augmentate with agency. So can you just, I mean, I don't want to ever assume that our listeners have just got complete knowledge and know everything about AR. Because I
Yeah.
think what we're finding is that there's a lot of people, especially those kind of what I describe as me, myself, and I kind of practitioners.
Yes.
Maybe they need some help. Maybe they don't understand. So can you just, what does AR agency mean? Can you just kind of unpack a little? I mean, this is not a
Right.
product.
Yes. And would you mind also, as a secondary part, as you're explaining, talk a little bit about how people interact with an agency? Like, how do they make that work? Because I think people know, but I think you're right. Not everyone may know. But I think where people really struggle is like, how? How do I make this work and be
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, Stephen, actually, for that question, because I don't think about that much. Most of the people I talk to do understand, but I could absolutely see that everybody's working in their environment and they're not necessarily keeping up on trends on, what's going on in the agency world. So we typically engage for 2 reasons. Somebody either is overwhelmed by the work they have to do, right? Or they recognize a skills gap. Sometimes that's a company that has no AR expertise in-house at all, right? And they need to quickly add it because they just got invited to a Magic Quadrant or a Wave and they don't want to do it incorrectly. So then they look for available resources. We usually come up in some kind of search and we become part of the conversation. We talk about how we can help them through the process. Sometimes it's, I'm now in charge of peer insights and I don't really know how to do that. Or, some other part of the process where they recognize they're just lacking expertise and they need somebody to come in quickly and solve a problem.
The interesting one for me
Yeah.
is, sorry to cut in, the interesting one for me is that it's some huge firms with massive AR teams that are also bringing in resources. So this isn't just, this is the first time you're getting into AR or the first time you're in a quadrant. Google's got a bunch of people
Actually, my hot take would be that I think the bigger the company, the bigger the AR team, the more the resources, the more likely they may lean on agency support for some kind of
I'd
augmentation.
agree with
Yeah.
that.
So, Greg, I'd love to hear you keep going on that.
Yeah.
And then just keep that in the back of your mind as a flavor.
Yeah. Well, that is the other side, right? There's the skills gap and then there's the bandwidth gap. And that is how we typically engage with the larger companies. It's not that they don't have that expertise, it's that the resources are stretched and maybe it's temporary or maybe it's another way of creating the bandwidth, but they just need the flow of evaluations has gotten too much, right? That's very common over the past couple of years. And we've spent a lot of time diving into that to figure out how to make it easier and better.
One of our clients does like over 200 major evaluations a
Oh, yeah,
year. It's just
for
mind
sure.
blowing. Like the man hours.
There was one client where I used to say they do 100 a year. They were really doing like between 250 and 300 a year, but nobody believed that. When I talked about what they were doing, I had to bring the number down just to make it something people could wrap
Right.
their heads around. But
Meanwhile, I'm like,
absolutely.
you're like, I've seen the receipts.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, yeah,
Well,
and our
right.
job was literally project managing, not really the process, but just, like, making sure we weren't losing one of these
Yeah.
reports along the
Eesh.
way, because if you're doing 250 to 300, you might be working on 20 at the same time all year long, which is just insanity to think of that kind of flow of evaluations. It makes it hard to do everything else that analyst relations is good at, right? And that's the frustrating thing for me when it comes to evaluations is how much it takes us out of what I think of as the sweet spot of analyst relations, which is looking forward instead of looking back at the last 12 months.
Yeah, 100%. I think the heretical thing I sometimes say that probably isn't good for me personally as a professional. The reports are, I think, the least important aspect of this job. I think a lot of executives, rightfully, look at, MQ placement as like the goal. That does not, in my opinion, move the needle in the way that prolonged two-way authentic relationship building with analysts does, because then you get that inflow of insight where you're actually using analyst knowledge and context to improve the business. Like clearly, MQ placement leads to inbound opportunity, 100%. But again, and I'm trying to do this less black and white thing. I think the world needs more nuance. So it's not that
Right.
the report is the least important thing. It's just that I think we over index and over rotate.
So
Everything else is equally more important.
maybe let me try and help with some nuance.
Okay.
I think let's just take the scenario of you've been asked to fill in 200 evaluations. I think the question is, are all of those of equal value? And I don't think they are. I think, if it's an MQ, a MarketScape, a Wave, it's probably valuable. But is that kind of mid-sized vendor who's trying to do an MQ wannabe asking you to fill in 200 questions in a spreadsheet because they used to work for Gartner? Do you really need that?
It depends.
So
Yeah.
if it's a case of we could be in 200 reports or we could be in 5, I'd argue what's the value of the other 195? Do they
Great.
really move the
What
needle?
does it depend on?
Well, so first of all, for the companies we're talking about, they typically are involved in so many spaces that they might have 40 to 50 magic quadrants, right? Out of
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
hundreds that they do per year, how many of those touch like an IBM or an Accenture, right? Or a Google?
I've heard the story that IBM's in 2/3 of the MQs.
I would not doubt that.
Yeah.
So that's part of it is even if you're just talking about tier one, you're talking about hundreds of valuations. Nathan,
That's
I would debate the prioritization of evaluations. I don't think they're unimportant, right? It's not it's not strong strategic work for the AR team. Clearly, they're doing more of them, right? The firms are doing more of them. There's value to them. People appreciate them. Everyone understands a magic quadrant, right? The person who has the least knowledge about analyst relations knows what a magic quadrant is.
Yes.
And having that kind of automatic buy-in makes it almost worth doing just because people will appreciate it. And sometimes you just need somebody to appreciate what you're doing. So I think as kind of a banner activity, you do that, right? Now, Stephen, getting down to the smaller firms, and Crystal, your question about what it depends on, let's say the Magic Quadrant criteria doesn't match your offering, right? And there might be a wave, but you're excluded for some reason. There are reasons why you might need that
That's fair.
other firm to offer the proof point to sales when prospects are waving a magic quadrant in your face and saying, where are you here? And you can go back with, a peak matrix or something and say, well, Gartner has their criteria, but according to this criteria, we're a leader, right? So you've got that. And then there's the standpoint of AEO, which many people care about. Even if you have that Gartner, Forrester, IDC report, having that validated by a second voice increases the LLM's confidence in
Greg,
saying, yes, this company is an important.
I think 100%. That's a master class in description.
So I want to just pick on that.
One sec,
Yeah.
Stephen.
So
Some of those secondary, tertiary firms, if you want to call them that, I don't really like the prime, tier 1, tier 2, tier 3
Completely agree with
description.
you. Yeah.
Make it easier for you to deploy those reports in more flexible ways. And so it is actually useful for AEO because you can park a little bit more content on your public landing page. You're not necessarily restricted to the same usage restrictions that maybe a Gartner employs, because licensing a Magic Quadrant is a very, very strict criteria on what you can and can't.
ask a specific question on this, Nathan, and maybe you're the expert that knows the answer, but this is living.
Probably not.
You're smarter than the average bear, so I'll give you some flowers. How
Plus
does
one.
an MQ turn up in an LLM?
Well,
That's the broad question. The sort of
Yeah.
nuanced question underneath it is, Gartner's so restrictive on how you can use it. Is it being read and the summaries and the being posted on LinkedIn and it's
Yes.
being scraped that way? Because it's not being scraped
No.
directly from Gartner.
But yeah, so what's happening is this is why licensing is so important.
Mhm.
When you license the report, the traditional demand gen workflow has been to park those behind gates because you want to capture the lead data. That does not increase LLM discoverability because LLMs can't get past the gate. But if you don't require a gate and you just make that accessible like a regular web page, then LLMs can scrape it.
But is that against the
No.
licensing
No, if
laws?
you've
No.
got the reprint, you can
Okay.
do what you like with it, but most people choose to gate it so they have the lead capture. Nathan, if you're done, I do have thoughts
I was
on
gonna
that.
say one more thing, and it's that
Yeah,
you can
yeah.
find almost any Magic Quadrant as a reprint online,
Filling
publicly
out a
So
form.
available.
what you're looking
Yeah.
Yeah.
Once you've filled out a form, yeah. And occasionally, especially with older MQs, you'll see people take away the gating, just trying to capture whatever's left in the market that has demand for that report. But I think there is a way to have a landing page that includes the key points that you need scraped. You can put your commentary on the landing page that says, according to this report and the authors, here are 10 points to take away. And that can be points about you, but it also can be the front end market piece that I feel like so many vendors almost ignore, right? And that's the part that's really valuable to people who are trying to understand the market, right? So include
It's
some
not
of
a
that commentary in your landing page so
it's
that
yeah.
you increase pickup. But you have
It's
to
not
do
a
the schema
binary
markup so the LLM knows how to read it.
it's not a binary decision. I made a post a while back about, traditional demand gen being dead. And it was more the case of demand gen tactics just have to evolve a little bit. So instead
Right.
of, like you said, parking the entire report behind the gate, give some context that the LLMs can access that's easily discoverable, and then still use your lead capture. You can do
Right.
both.
What's the
Completely.
impact on Gartner from a licensing point of view, though? If I can just jump on ChatGPT and ask it a bunch of questions about an MQ, and say there's 10 vendors in that MQ, and they've all put their little sparklers on their website, and that's all been scraped by an LLM. Do I really need to license the report from Gartner?
So it comes down to money because
As the enterprise, I mean,
so
not the
I
vendor.
think Greg, correct me if I'm wrong, so reprint license is somewhere around 15 grand, and that's vendor specific. So a vendor can license it and then it is, discoverable on the internet. But if I'm another vendor in that report and I want to attribute myself to that report, I still have to license it. So the true value of an MQ is probably the licensing rights. And so I think Anyway, Greg, please.
I'm sure that end user subscribers of Gartner appreciate Magic Quadrants, right? They're going to read them on Gartner.com. They're not necessarily going to go find a reprint. So I don't want to discount the value of a Magic Quadrant beyond its value to vendors. But in terms of the ideas and even the language of the Magic Quadrant being publicly accessible, you can find, I will say, any Magic Quadrant. I find it hard to believe that nobody is getting a reprint of every Magic Quadrant that's out there. Beyond that, the ideas that are in the Magic Quadrant become part of the conventional wisdom anyway, right? So it affects how journalists cover the market. It affects how people talk about the market on LinkedIn and everywhere else. So it becomes the public record regardless of the entire text of the report being available anywhere. So I always think of it in terms of, when does an analyst thought, a novel analyst thought, become part of conventional wisdom? What's the gap, right, between an analyst having an idea and that idea becoming part of the conversation? I'm going to say about 6 months. And Crystal actually showed this to me, doing some analysis of, when did we get an insight from an analyst? This is something that they communicated to us maybe on an inquiry or something that came through some other conversation. When did that show up in research, right? And so you've got roughly a 2 to 3 month gap between hearing something novel from an analyst and it showing up in research. And then you've got a further 3 to 4 month gap between it showing up in research and becoming conventional wisdom. So that to me is a fascinating dynamic, where if you are actually engaging with analysts and not just a consumer, right? Somebody who's just waiting for things either in report form or waiting for it to show up in an LLM, you've got a 6 month lead time on everyone else figuring out what is going to be conventional wisdom. And this is what I was talking about, AR being a forward-looking exercise, right? I want to be aware of the state of play in 6 months to the degree certainty that is possible. Because if I'm thinking about who my prospects are, even my current customers who are being approached by competitors, they're not buying the product that you're offering now, right? A sales cycle for most enterprise technologies is at least 6 months.
Mhm.
So they're buying the product that's going to exist in 6 months, and the competitive environment they're buying for is 6 months away. So why are we always focused on the last 12 months? That's, you're talking to ghosts, right? Those people don't exist anymore. They're already deep in somebody else's funnel. And I think it was Elena Hutchinson who said most of those companies are already trialing other platforms, right?
Mhm.
Especially if you're a SaaS company, they're in a trial, and maybe they're duplicating systems because they've got your product and they've got your competitor's product that they're trialing. So
Yes.
you've got to be prepared for what's coming next, or else, you're ignoring the opportunity for what happened last year.
This
The
is
the TLDR essentially of what we're talking about is the Magic Quadrant, albeit super valuable, it's only half of the picture, right? So, the value, Stephen, in my perspective, what I'm hearing from Greg is, yes, you may be able to ChatGPT anything you want and get whatever, but that's not going to help you with your roadmap ahead, right? And that may help a buyer, but then insert nuance, right?
yeah.
And where the real value is in your relationship with Gartner, maybe it's at top of funnel sort of lead gen situation, but it's really like, how do we think about our business as we move forward?
This is where the tension comes into play, and I don't envy this, of a CEO who has to think about the balance between, how do we answer what our customers are asking for? So how do we focus on that versus how do we innovate? And I think a lot of companies probably get that balance wrong. And again, I don't envy them, and I'm not saying it's wrong in the sense that you don't do that, but how do I prioritize the people that pay us today are satisfied, while also ensuring that I'm doing the things to look 6, 12, 24 months ahead,
Mhm.
especially in this current macroeconomic climate? That's not easy.
I'm gonna dive in here because you've hit a raw nerve for me. I get so frustrated with the product teams who are. We listen to our customers exclusively. That's where we get our information from. We listen to customers. We're customer obsessed. No customer was telling Nokia in 2006 that we didn't want a keyboard on the bottom of our phones. Steve Jobs just didn't listen to customers, just didn't care, thought they were idiots and didn't know what they wanted. Now, that's the extreme end, and I'm not saying you should do that, but pure innovation happens in somebody's head that they've broke.
100%.
So you are right, Nathan. There's a real balance. Being customer obsessed, listening to your customers, absolutely do that. But allow a space in your thought process, in your R&D, in your product management to go. Customers don't know where this is going, and they don't know what they need. We need to do this.
I go back to my comment about the macroeconomic climate. Steve Jobs took a risk. It could have failed.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think there's a lot of leeway for that right now. I think we are very focused on, making sure businesses are profitable, that we're paying out dividends. And again, that's not wrong. It's just the way the system works.
ChatGPT's come from a bunch of crazy people with a crazy idea. Jensen at NVIDIA.
But it doesn't turn a profit.
Yeah, Jensen at NVIDIA had an idea 10 years ago around parallel computing and doubled down when everybody else was focused on something else. And his long-term bet, you got IBM innovating on quantum is ahead of that being monetizable. I kind of agree with you, but I disagree also.
You're providing me the perfect segue into what I wanted to ask Greg about, because
that's why we have 3 hosts, man. That's why we do it this way.
He has the purview of having been in this industry for a while and is also very future oriented. You just listed off some very big companies that were able to take risks. And I think we're seeing a parallel trend in analyst relations of, I hate to say it this way, but the rich get richer, right? As analyst firms ask for more from analyst relations teams, it's the large analyst relations teams that are able to stomach that. With the complexity of what's being asked today, Greg, including the scope creep of broader influence orchestration. You talked about, you work with folks who are in charge of ARInsights or G2. What are your thoughts on how small teams or large teams deal with this? Because we are really at an inflection point.
Mm-hmm. Great question.
Yes. And I just posted about this yesterday. It's getting harder to be a solo AR person because the scope is expanding and you cannot be an expert in everything anymore. It was very recently possible to check all of the boxes of AR as one person. Increasingly, that's not going to be true. You just won't be able to keep up. I do think we've gotten so much more capable. What has really impressed me about analyst relations during the dawn of LLMs and all that is they didn't try to become more efficient. They tried to grow, right? Expand what they were capable of. I'm seeing it all over the place. And that has been fascinating to me because all of a sudden we're an expert in our product, right? We know more about the analysts. We can do more investigation of trends and opportunities without necessarily pulling in all the experts in your company. So I do think we're more capable as people, which is fantastic, but the amount of attention you have to spend to all of these new areas means there are 15 other areas you are not paying attention to, not becoming expert in. And you can accumulate all those expertise. What's plural of expertise?
Expertise?
Expertise? Yeah, something like that. But that's a process, and you just don't have time to go through them all. So I am sympathetic to that, and that now becomes a prioritization game for companies, right? You have to decide which of these aspects are important. And that's why I was saying that works on a company by company basis, but not necessarily on an AR Pro by AR Pro basis, right? If your company is saying, okay, this basket of things is really important for us to get out of analyst relations, and that is not the interests or skill set of the AR professional, now you have to wonder, is this job still right for me, right? And if not, what am I interested in? What am I good at? And where does that match up with companies' needs? So I anticipate there's going to be a somewhat painful process where we're rearranging where AR pros are good fits with their companies. And if you don't care, if you're kind of generally interested in all of it, great, do what your company is asking for or needs. And to Stephen's point about Steve Jobs, maybe you're going to tell them what they need, right? But you can develop according to your interests along with your company, or maybe you just have to go find something else. I don't know. That sounds like a lot of pain on the horizon, but I don't see any way around it.
I do think you're hitting the nail on the head in that I think analyst relations can go a lot of different ways moving forward. I think there's the product marketing track, which is kind of where I kind of try to fit into product marketing light, if you will, learning enough about the product to be dangerous, being helpful to the product marketing team. I think there's the public relations track where you're more kind of focused on both the paid and earned media visibility aspect of the job. There's the sales enablement focus, I think, where you are really just tied to the P&L strongly. You are ingrained in the sales team and you are helping create content. You are giving trainings. Then there's probably the strategy focus, which is maybe where that forward looking aspect comes into play more, where you're really tied into both the corporate strategy and product strategy teams and you're feeding that insight back in. I mean, in my ideal world, we're doing all those things. We have a
Nathan,
team
I
to
think I'd
scale.
add another category because I agreed. I was nodding in my head. I think then there's the programmatic person who, going back to what Greg was saying, they're in reports, they're managing it as a project
Yes.
management function, and they don't get to do any of the wonderful things you just described. They're just in the machine, if you will, of being AR.
I would challenge that slightly because I think as long as AR exists, that has to be a part of the job, no matter which of the silos you
I
sit in.
think there's some people who just do that.
There is absolutely some
Larger
people.
companies, for sure.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
They'll just do that. They don't get to do any of the other things, unfortunately, because maybe they enjoy the programmatic and
Crystal,
management.
Crystal, I want to hear from you. I would also just say
Yep.
that Greg's correct. At larger companies that already exist, I know of several larger programs that have AR ops professionals that are just focused on internal work. Do not talk to analysts. I cannot fathom ever having the capacity to deploy a role like that. I see the value in it, but kind
Yeah.
of goes back to my earlier question. Bigger teams can do more because they have more resource. Crystal,
And
Greg,
sorry,
whoever.
I do want to get Crystal in, but I don't want to lose this thread on AR ops.
You're our guest.
Stephen, I don't like the painting that role as lockdown and
No,
boring,
some
right?
people. I
There
mean,
is
my brother's a project manager, and he loves the boring bit of being a. It would drive me bonkers, but
yeah.
he loves it. He's built a career in it, and he's in the operational side of running. So there's some people who just like that stuff, and that's. I should. You are right, Greg, to catch me. I shouldn't denigrate that part of the role. There's some people who love that. Are really good at it. I think of somebody like Kathy Baxter and Lucinda at HPE. We haven't
Mhm.
mentioned Lucinda's, Sophie Kwan and Ruth Busby at Cisco. There's some fantastic people who are just really good operators. They love the operational side. They love a good spreadsheet. They love all the programs and the programmatic side, and they're fantastic at it. So
Yeah.
I should apologize. I'm sorry.
And you can think about that, all of that strategically, and that creates a lot of data, right?
Mhm.
And if you are good at interpreting data and storytelling, that becomes a very strategic function. So
Yeah,
yeah, it's not
100%.
just
It's literally the orchestrator of the symphony, right? It's
Mhm.
if you are trying to do 200 reports and do all of these events and what I was going to say, Nathan, was what you were describing was our PMA presentation, which is
Yes.
our goes across the framework that we crafted together about how does AR fit across the go-to-market landscape.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, again, I was trying to say, in an ideal world, we do all of it. It's just
Mhm.
because of the depth and complexity that's starting to emerge with each of those silos, it's increasingly impossible. I was also going to say, you're 100% correct that that operational role is an orchestrator. I went to the Spotlight Summit a couple of years ago, and I can't remember the company, but there was a gentleman who presented where he was almost an internal analyst relations data scientist. He was in charge of the insights library. He was literally building the thing we always talk about. Like when I did my AR Engage presentation, I talked about building your internal systems. That was his entire job, to build that system, own it, and maximize it. And like, that's the holy grail, right? But again, that's probably the hardest part of the job when you're doing everything else or one of those specific
Well, it's
silos.
And,
impossible, right? It's like being an IC and a manager of a large organization. Like, you have your book of deliverables and then you're overseeing everyone else's. It's really, really hard because you're asking someone to
Welcome to my world.
be a tree in the forest and also make sure that the forest is growing appropriately. I mean,
I mean,
and
just
you
put a
have to
per
build it and you have to maintain it, right? So
yeah.
you
And
can't just
that's a lot of what
build
you
it.
do.
What's that?
That's a lot of what you do today because you have your designated relationships, and you're running a really important part of our business.
Yeah, it's so Kara Lira from our team has done this at several companies, and I don't want to tell tales. There is a company for which she built a lot of these systems, and then they were going to run it, but somehow it fell through the cracks, change in leadership. They almost brought us back in to build it again. And Kara said, "You have it still. It's in there. You just have to use it, right?" So, you can invest in building these structures, but you also have to keep in mind some of the cost, if it's just bandwidth, opportunity costs, or if you're hiring somebody to do it or having an external resource do it, you have to build in the cost of maintaining it over the long haul, or you lose the value of having that R&D time of building the whole thing out, right? There's an enormous amount of value in that, especially for these companies that have the huge programs with, 200 evaluations a year. There's so much data coming out of that just runs into the gutter. And that is frustrating to me, right? It's like with insights, Nathan, you were talking about the insights library. There's so much that we hear about that's valuable. And what happens to that, right? It runs off the table into the gutter, right? There's so much opportunity in things we know or could know that we just don't take advantage of. And that is frustrating to
Yeah.
me when we talk about the problem that AR people have in defining ROI. And it's like we're filling up our car with gas, but we're just kind of holding the nozzle up in the air and hoping some of it hits the tank, right?
Or that we can't tell how much is left in the tank. I think the challenge, you can create insights. Every good AR pro can write a really strong insight. That is a
Hmm.
fundamental part of the job. You can put them in a system like Architect or Oz. I
Right.
think the last mile effectiveness is the part that is hard to gauge. Like, how do I ensure that that got to the right person, that they took it in, that they did or didn't act on it? When you
Right.
think about an activation framework, both of those things are equally important.
Yeah.
That is the part that is almost impossible at current scope, and ability to track.
Well, yeah, I mean,
And
it's
that
interesting.
is I did try and set up like a questionnaire, a post engagement questionnaire. So you had an inquiry, you have a 3-question questionnaire that goes to the seat holder after that says, were you talking to the right person? Was the conversation, fruitful? Did you learn anything you're going to share? Right. So you're building in that thought process of, I did, but I haven't shared that yet.
It's
And
fascinating. I was having this discussion with somebody about how you quantify the value of inquiry. And
yeah,
from the person who's giving it, when you've got them. So I always think of the sort of pop idol or sort of kind of when you know it when you see it. And so I'll be doing these inquiry calls, and you'll be with some of the smartest people in the company. These guys are and gals are like super smart. And you'll see that senior leader go, haven't
yeah,
thought of it like that.
yeah,
And if I get land one of those in a half an hour or 45-minute call or an hour call, if I can literally just make somebody think differently, make them think through an idea, I'm not saying implement it, but in oftentimes going through the thought process of why you won't do something that was suggested gets you gets you to a better place on the thought that because now you've had a more evolved thought process. I'm not going to do that, but I'm thoughtfully and cognitively going to explore why I shouldn't do that. And now that reinforces and you get a better answer of this is why I'm going to do the thing I was going to do anyway, but now I've got a better perspective on it.
right.
It's
And I
how
do
do you
think we
capture the magic, though, Greg? I mean, in a and applaud you for the three-part questionnaire, but it's the X factor comment. It's that thing that's going to live rent-free in that exec's mind for the next 2 weeks as they're sitting at an airport going, "How do we do that? How do we think
yeah,
through
and
how do you capture that? I don't know."
so I have thought about this. It came up on a call. I was talking to a seat holder, and I asked about how he's sharing insights, and he said, I don't share them with the team. My team is overloaded with, hey, did you see this Harvard Business Review article, or did you read this LinkedIn post?" Being inundated with insight, right? And they don't have time. They tune it all out. Like maybe they read the odd thing, but it's not treated with the value that we would expect as our people, because it's coming from. So that's why I'm trying to define, this is a 6-month jump on conventional wisdom, right? You've got a window into the future. Treat it that way. I've tried to come up with delivery vehicles that are more engaging or more timely or more suited to the type of insights that you're getting. I think part of it is also we use the word insight for a very broad range of
Yeah.
concepts, right? And so I put some thought into what defines the differences in value for an insight, right? Or how you would treat an insight. And I think we need a new taxonomy. We can't just call it insight. There's urgency, right? How important is it that we act on this right away? Depth, like how much did we uncover by hearing this that we didn't know already? And value, right? So I learned something today. It's not going to change any behavior. I could tell the world and it wouldn't have an impact, right? So on those three axes, let's try and come up with a taxonomy for different kinds of insights. And that will tell you how you communicate them, how you treat them, what kind of expectations there are after having communicated them. Because to say this is how we're going to handle insights is almost automatically invalid, because if you've got like a severe threat that you just heard that IBM's moving into your market, right? And they haven't announced it yet, right? That's urgent, that's valuable. But if you heard like, I talked to somebody who doesn't like your pricing strategy. Okay. Like that's good to know. What am I going to do differently? Maybe nothing, because we've got many more customers, right? I will keep track of that, but
I
I'm not going
think
to
you're onto
change my
something
business
there
for it.
as a framework. Develop that for sure.
Really quickly, I think like I love that. But I think the core is how do we think like an executive and track it back to our goals, right? So, whatever the taxonomy is, I think the alignment has to be aligned to your corporate goals.
Yes and no, because I would say that sometimes corporate OKRs are not necessarily as focused on that 6, 12, 24-month horizon. So I think there has to be a little nuance there. Yes, you should absolutely always tie your program back to the OKRs that depend.
No, the insight is what I'm saying, because what you're trying to do is get someone's attention and also validate for yourself, is this worthy of my executive's time? Will this impact whatever our goals are? It
Yeah.
could be growth goal. Well, it's always growth goals, right? It could be the P&L. It could be competitive, right? Like whatever you're driving towards, is it a game stopper? Is it a speed bump, right? Like, so if
Yeah.
we present our insights in a way that is actually relevant and actionable, then you will get, or you should, unless people just think that you're a complete moron, right? But if you make it relevant and specific, then people will listen, hopefully.
So, Crystal, bring us home. We're 43 minutes in now. I mean, I think I could talk to you for hours, Greg, about what you just said. That point's really kind of, maybe that's something I need to follow up with you on, but
Hey, I gave you an
quantifying.
insight.
Yeah, you stopped me. You did the thing, but the sort of quantifying value of an insight or a sort of, yeah, that's fascinating. But Crystal, bring us home. We're gonna run on for hours here.
I know. I feel like we need to, there's so many people we need a part two, because we've
Absolutely.
had fantastic people, Greg.
Way to
You've
do it.
been super fun to talk to today. I hope it was also fun for you. A nice
It's
little
always
break
fun to talk to you.
from
Yeah.
the day to day. So this is another episode of AR Chat. Thanks so much, Greg, for joining us and pushing us to think differently and beyond where we normally go. This is a totally different format, and I really love it. So thank you so much. Thank you to my co-hosts, and thank you for tuning in. Bye, all.
Thank you
Bye.
all.